Okay, so it's 5 o'clock sharp, so let's get started, okay? So,
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon. Thank you for being here this evening or afternoon for the last meeting of our seminar Znak, Język, Rzeczywistość during this semester. Of course, we will continue our meetings next semester, starting as for the end of the next month. Today, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Franco Manni, a guest from Italy. Dr. Manni works at Philosophy Department of Liceo Scientifico Leonardo in Brescia. He received his PhD in philosophical theology at King's College London. According to our guest's profile at ResearchGate, he worked on quite different subjects, such as, for example, Italian political philosophers of 19th and 20th centuries, philosophical theology and theological ethics, also, which is quite interesting, the works of Tolkien in relation to the history of philosophy. But today's talk is going to be about mind, brain, language, meaning, Thomas Aquinas, and philosophy of Herbert Mackay. Mind is not the brain. You have a floor, Frank, please.
Thank you, Thaddeus. I thank the Department of Philosophy of Warsaw University and the Association of Semiotics Poland for organizing this seminar, online seminar. And yes, mind is not the brain is the title, and subtitle of my talk is the Bimillennial Development of a Doctrine. Yes, bimillennial, without exaggeration. Bimillennial means a period which lasts 20 centuries. Aristotle gives his most substantial account of the intellect and thinking in his work, De Anima, on the soul, book 3, chapters 4 and 5, which is the most commented passage of the entire history of philosophy. Since antiquity, the pagan philosophers like Teofrastus, Alexander Aphrodisias, Themistius, and Simplicius started their comments to that passage, and then there were the medieval philosophers, Jewish, Muslim, and Christians, such as Moses Maimonides, Averroes, Avicenna, and Thomas Aquinas. And then, in the Italian Renaissance, the secular agnostic philosophers of the 16th century. A scholar called this discussion a karaoke that lasted 2 millennia, from the 4th century BC till the 16th century after Christ. However, in the 17th century, with René Descartes and modern philosophy, he is labeled as the father of the modern philosophy, this long discussion was interrupted and prevailed, undisputed, the idea of thought as a private product of the individual. It is not by chance that the icon of this idea is a statue called the Thinker by Auguste Rodin, where the bodily representation of the act of thinking resembles the bodily representation of the act of defecating. if you visualize that statue. I could see it in reality with my eyes in Amiens, in Picardy, dans la France. It is true that some few great thinkers, such as Hegel, Mazzini, Sigmund Freud, Benedetto Croce, Ferdinand de Saussure, Teilhard de Chardin, and Karl Popper, supported the absurdity of the thesis of Descartes, that is represented by Rodin, that is, the thesis of thought as a private product of the individual. Various forms: absolute spirit for Hegel, duties of humanity for Mazzini, langue versus parole for de Saussure, noosphere for Chardin, superego for Freud, word tree for Popper, supporting the thesis of an interpersonal mind. But they did so while being unaware of the tradition of 20 centuries of Aristotelian commentators that had preceded them. The first scholar to consciously and explicitly connect this discussion of the ancient and medieval past with the conceptual findings of modern and contemporary philosophy was Herbert McCabe, an English philosopher who died in 2001. He was born in 1926. He lived mostly in Oxford. And, okay, let us speak as Thaddeus said, in short, with this topic. The topic is philosophy of mind. Philosophy of mind. In other languages, in Italian, for instance, we call this gnoseology, or sometimes psychology of knowledge. So philosophy of mind is most widespread name. Sorry, there is some noise. If we could get rid of it, hopefully. Sorry. And let us speak about us, about you. We human beings. We are humans. And even if we are rational animals, but we are still animals, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Yes, since we are animals, we have senses, we've got senses. 5 external senses: sight, touch, hearing, smell, and taste. And even internal senses. But of that, I will speak in a short while afterwards. Sensation is not itself a physical reality. If we projected, for instance, a red light onto a cat's body, the redness would be in the cat's fur physically, as it would happen on any material surface, a table, a rock. Whereas the red light projected into the cat's eyes would be in the cat, as Aquinas would say, intentionally, not physically, but intentionally, as a factor, that is, in the cat's interpretation of its world. The presence of redness in the visual sensation of the cat now is not physical, but is intentional. We have so reached the first level of knowledge. the sense knowledge. Because the cat is not just red, but he's aware of redness. In fact, we can say that an animal can see not because we detect its eyes as one among other physical parts of its body, such as legs, lungs, and teeth, but because we experience that it, the animal, behaves differently when there is dark from when there is light, and then we detect that it's able to see. All the senses make the world meaningful for the animal, because through them the animal reacts to its environment in appropriate ways. The environment has become significant to the animal. A sensation is a peculiar relation of one physical thing, in this case the cat, to other physical things. A wall, a floor, a table, whatever. Quote, Aquinas does not hesitate to say that the perceptions of brute animals are spiritual, meaning that an animal acts in terms of such relations of relevance, and not simply as, say, a billiard ball is pushed physically by another billiard ball. End quote. On the one hand, by the means of their senses, the animals are open to the world. An animal sees things as dangerous or exciting or repulsive. It is not surrounded by neutral facts, but by things that matter to it. It has a world that is an environment organized in terms of significance. However, on the other hand, we can also say that the animal is closed, not open, within a world organized by its sensory system, that is, in terms of attraction and repulsion. I suggest to Anima to switch off the microphone, perhaps, because there is an echo.
I'm so sorry.
There is an echo. Yeah, thank you. On the other hand, the animal is closed within a world organized by its sensory system, that is, in terms of attraction or repulsion. Something very subjective, you see. Which are more the point of view of that animal than characteristics of the things, of the world, of the reality in itself. When we are speaking of a world in itself, behind or beyond the animal's perception, a world where different things exist on their own right, bestowed with objective characteristics, we are just speaking of our human, anthropomorphic world, where ideas and thoughts can catch something of the world in itself, and not just its importance for us as it happens by means of the senses. To the animals and to us qua animals, insofar as we are animals, to be alive means to be structured in particular ways that are fixed and inherited from the species. Whereas the human animal, the rational animal, not only shares in much of this inherited from the species, but it operates in structures that are of its own making, that is, language. Animals are born already equipped with a lot of behavioral tendencies, sexual and others, and all those tendencies are supplied by the species. Animals do not have to learn to be sexually attracted to each other or to make preparations for rearing their young, differently from us as rational animals. McCabe preferred the phrase rational animals is a Aristotelian phrase, you know, in order to name the human beings, rational animals. But McCabe, since he was a man of the end of the 20th century, he preferred this other phrase for labeling or calling us human beings. Linguistic animals, not rational animals, but linguistic animals. We human beings are animals, and like many other mammals, we have 5 external and 4 interior senses. Every sense belongs to a bodily organism and therefore is itself bodily. Every sense can relate to external world bodies. For instance, by the sense of sight, a sheep can see a wolf. The article, indefinite article a, because every bodily material entity is always an individual, that is, unique. 2 identical wolves do not exist. Neither do 2 identical sheep or 2 identical grains of sand. Therefore, every sensation is something unique. The 5 external senses are on the surface of the animal's body, whereas the interior senses are inside in the brain, the famous brain. The first of the interior senses is the so-called, from the medieval tradition, sensus communis. Sensus communis. I can write it here in the chat. Which receives sense images and put sight, hearing, smell, and taste in relation with the most fundamental of the 5 external senses, that is, touch. Without sensus communis, according to the medieval theory of the Aristotelian commentators, we could not attribute the redness, for instance, the smell and the smoothness of a rose, that flower, a rose, to the same substance, to the same thing, to the same material thing, to the same rose. We need a sensus communis, which gathers all the input from hearing, from sight, from smell. The second interior sense is imagination, because we humans, like other animals, also seek, or we are concerned of, we care for, what is not currently present now and affecting us through the external senses. We care for, we are concerned of, also we deal of past experiences, past things we have already sensed. This is the reason why imagination stores and preserves images. For instance, I'll give an example. Into my nervous system, central nervous system, that is the brain, remember that the title of my talk is The Brain and the Mind. Better said, the mind is not the brain. The images are, for instance, into my nervous system, the brain, I have stored the visual image of the face of this morning's security guard when he was starting an answer to the first question from a group of visitors. And similar to this one, to this particular individual image, many billions of other images have stored into my brain. The third interior sense is so-called sensus estimativus. I wrote it down in the chat. Evaluation of the world, which makes us feel both attraction and repulsion for the various sense experiences of our life. Evaluation, is that thing good or evil for me? Evaluation. The fourth one is sense memory. Just as imagination stores sense images from sight, smell, taste, and other senses, so, in a similar way, sense memory stores the tendencies evoked by the evaluation of the world, the sensus estimativus. Therefore, it is an awareness, therefore it is a storage of attractions and repulsions of my past life. This memory allows sentient animals like us, or the dogs, or the cows, or the cats, to have a sense of the past, and therefore an awareness of themselves as individuals in their life journey. In fact, the images themselves are not connected to my autobiography. No. You or me, I can imagine a scene without my presence in it. Whereas to claim to remember a scene, to putting it in the past, is related to having been present to it and having reacted to what was around as attractive or repulsive. However, in certain animals, that is human beings, there is also another memory, apart from the sense memory, which is not a sense, that is, which is not related to an evaluation of the evils and goods as perceived by our senses. In order to distinguish it from sense memory, I mentioned previously, we can call it intellectual memory, because it does not store sensations, but thoughts. About the definition of thought in a short while. In fact, for instance, I always remember that 2 plus 2 equals 4, regardless of the experiences of my past life. Whereas, by means of sense memory, I can remember the attractions and repulsions I experienced during that particular situation, say at school, at primary school, in my real autobiography, when I learned that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Therefore, there must be, since there are two memories, there must be a human mental faculty which is not a sense, and which you can call intellect or thinking. Thinking produces thoughts, doesn't it? What is a thought? A thought, and I'm relying on the Aristotelian tradition throughout the centuries, a thought is different from a sensation. I already highlighted that a sensation is unique. A sheep sees now or then a wolf is something unique, individual. But A thought is different, is not individual, is not unique. This stand, or intellectual position, starts with Plato and was debated and refined by medieval philosophers. A thought, synonyms, idea, concept, is a universal, that is a class, a set, a group, a non-individual entity. The concept, I provide you with an example. The concept, universal, thought, or idea, all these words are synonyms. The concept of spoon is the set or group of some individual entities that exist qua individuals, insofar they are individuals, unique and repeatable, within the extramental world, extra, out of my mind, but which, within our mental world, we group into the same set or group or class or category because of certain characteristics that we think are present within these individuals. As for this example, spoon, stiff, indented, manual tool meant to bring edible liquids toward the mouth during meals. Pay attention to all these words related to other concepts, that is, other sets, other groups. And nothing there is individual. Nothing, nothing, nothing. A concept, idea, thought, and universal can be predicated, which means attributed to, an indefinite number of individuals. That is to say, we can think or describe an indefinite number of individuals in the same way. That is to say, we can answer in the same way when, as for each one of these individuals, someone asks the question. What is it? What is this? That is to say, we can group an indefinite number of individuals into the same set, which is defined and circumscribed by the above listed characteristics. Now the core of my communication, the brain and its mind. I'm not aware of any direct influences on McCabe of Karl Popper and John Eccles' book, you know. That book they wrote jointly, where the authors refuse the reductionist theory, which argues that brain and mind are the same thing. And where, more in particular, Popper states the existence of so-called world 3, which is the interpersonally shared world of all ideas / thoughts in their objective contents. McCabe instead explicitly refers to Aquinas and to Wittgenstein. McCabe thinks that the brain is an organ. Organ is a Greek word, organon, which means tool. The Greek word organon, which means tool. McCabe thinks that the brain is an organ, a tool, meant for many tasks, among which are also the enactment of the interior senses, so the images. But the brain is not the organ, the tool of thinking. Quote, imaginatio, it is one of the 4 interior senses according to Aristotelian tradition of the Middle Ages, we can use the English word which is quite similar. Imagination, isn't it? Imagination is a sense power and an operation of the brain. So, do you remember, imagination, or imaginatio in Latin, is that interior sense which stores the echoes of the sensations of the external senses, like that face or that security guard in the morning when he was responding to the first question from the visitors. That face, that image stored in my brain, in my physical organ of my body. That is imagination. Sense power and an operation of the brain. It is a myth that the brain is somehow the organ of thought. End quote. Linguistic communication, in fact, is evidence that proves how an interpersonal sharing of thoughts is possible. It is what is happening now, right now, between me and you. An interpersonal sharing of thoughts. Whereas it is impossible to share sensations and feelings unless we describe our sensations or our feelings linguistically, by means of thoughts, by means of sets, by means of universals. That is to say, while or when we think them. Quote, no configuration or activity of my brain cells could be an idea or concept or meaning. Any such configuration would be my private property, distinct from yours, just as my 2 nails. End quote. It is not the brain, but it is language that is, what? The nervous system of human community. The non-inherited but homemade nervous system for interpreting deliveries of the inherited nervous system, that is, sensations.
Aspetta, scusa,
A
Junior,
nervous
che sto
system
seguendo un
is a
seminario.
bodily structure we inherit.
Arrivo.
Language is another structure which makes possible the interpretation of our sensations. End quote. If you objected that my thinking can be hindered, obstacled, stopped by physical damage, a wound, when someone hits me with this, for instance, a physical damage my brain can suffer from, Aquinas would reply that it happens because thoughts, ideas, are always related to something bodily. They are not bodily, but they are related to something bodily. Namely, the images and the evaluations of the virtus estimative I mentioned previously. Out in the external world, everything is individual, unique. And there we can find both a factor of intelligibility called form and a factor of unintelligibility called matter that we can reach out to just with our body. If the latter, matter, makes every being an individual, the former, form, is what makes it thought. That is to say, connected to other individuals within a set, within a group, within an universal. However, the former cannot exist without the latter. No thoughts can exist without being, quote, in some way a return to the interior senses he calls imagination. Aquinas calls imagination. Imaginatio, sorry. The interior bodily sense of what it is like to be sensually aware of the world, end quote. For instance, for example, when a person thinks the concept, the idea, the thought of mother, he might see the image of his mother's face, or also the word mother childishly handwritten on a white paper sheet, or whatever other image. But whatever image it be, it will be an image, so something bodily, something coming from the external world is echo of a sensation. Mother as handwritten words, or the face of my mother, but that person, he could never help thinking this concept without conceiving an image at the very same time. Let us do this experiment ourselves. Whatever thought, whatever concept, whatever idea we try to think, we are obliged to connect it with a sensual image. Usually from sight, from the sense of sight. Whatever be the concept, abstract, like logarithm or justice, not just table or mother. Let us try. Shall you try? Think about justice, or about interaction, or about logarithm. Are they quite abstract as concepts? Yes, they are. But we can't think them without associating them to sensual images. And that's because we are animals. What McCabe does, and both Wittgenstein and de Saussure do not, so the philosopher of language of the 20th century, is to try to connect with the long-lasting debate about spirituality, separateness, and interpersonality of the intellect, of Themistius, Alexander, of Simplicius, of Averroes, of Maimonides, of Aquinas, throughout the centuries and the millennia. In this connection, here, McCabe is original. He argues that according to Aristotle, Aquinas, and others, thoughts have to be related to images, but these thinkers take it just as an empirical fact, what they see, what they experiment. Whereas, thanks to the philosophy of language of the 20th century, we can improve this ancient and medieval theory and explain something about the cause, because the modern interpreters of Aquinas, analytical Thomists actually, quote, in explaining the essential connection of thought and language, start from the language end, instead of, as Aquinas does, starting from the thought end, end quote. We contemporaries, analyze understanding in terms of human communication, whereas Aquinas analyzes communication in terms of understanding. And McCabe thinks that, although this is not a big difference, nevertheless, 20th century analysis is an improvement of that analysis undertaken in the 13th century. Because now we can understand better why what Aquinas thought is true, is in fact true. Moreover, if such an intellect is nothing but this, it is, like every human being, limited and dependent. In particular, it absolutely needs the human body and its senses. Quote, for Aquinas, to know about, to try to understand an individual, we need more than a mind. We need a body and its sensual awareness. If we had no bodies, we might know a great deal of rather beautiful theoretical physics, but it would be non-distinguishable from pure mathematics. We would not be able to lay hold on what it was about. Put it another way, the only way to be quite sure a cat is the same cat is to keep your eye on it. It is a matter not of your mind, but of your bodily senses. Now I ask the chairperson, namely Thaddeus, how much time is left? Thaddeus.
Maybe I will respond instead of Tadeusz. You can take your time. I think that it's...
How long have I have spoken so far?
Let's say 10 minutes more. Is it enough?
Just 5 minutes?
10 minutes or 15 if
okay.
you
Okay,
prefer.
so 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Please remind me the limit, Thomas. Thank you. To communicate, on the one hand, means to share something with someone else. On the other hand, it means to share something. To share with someone else, and to share something, a content. McCabe calls it an interpretation of the world, namely the intellectual interpretation, as distinguishable from the sensitive interpretation. Such an interpretation, which tells us something about how the world is, leans onto bodily entities, but it does this in a different way from, say, a microscope, a tool like the microscope. It is one thing to use a microscope to see something more clearly, and a completely other thing is to use language to articulate the world more clearly. In fact, microscopes function because of their material features, material shape, material characteristics, lenses, and so forth. Whereas words do not work because of material characteristics or features. Quote, they function as signs because of how we use them. Their physical properties do not really matter. And we can experience that because we can understand, we can understand a communication, for instance, in another language. Now, I am not a native English speaker, you are not a native English speakers, but nevertheless, we can understand because it is not the sounds, the material shapes or features of words which matter. No. Just a matter of agreement or convention between us, not something physical. The communication is based on agreement or convention. Now I have to cut off some paragraphs. And speaking and thinking, well, I have to cut off not just a paragraph or a few paragraphs, but an entire section, because the time is running out. And so I just say, in brief, in a summary, that these Wittgensteinian, de Saussurean, and Maccabean philosophy holds that thinking and speaking are the very same thing. They are not two things, so that we can't think alone. The statue by Auguste Rodin, the thinker, does not represent the reality. When we think without having around us material people, materially in our room, we are still speaking to others, even though not loudly, but silently. However, since I have to cut off this section, I cannot go into the details of this argument. Whereas the last section is private and public. Language is always what is common and not private, regardless of speaking silently or aloud, regardless. Aquinas never says that thoughts, Aquinas, back in the Middle Ages, mind, never says that thoughts are subjective or private. Never. Apart from the trivial meaning that not always do I read or talk loud. For Aquinas, the spiritual is a communal and is immaterial. Communal, immaterial. Mind, pay attention to the striking difference from the modern sensibility starting with Descartes. Because that modern sensibility holds that what is spiritual is private. For Aquinas, the spiritual is a communal and is immaterial. This view is a contrary of Descartes' view, who thinks that the spiritual is a private, whereas the material, the body, is the public. Both Aquinas and Wittgenstein think that there cannot be such a thing as a private language. There is a sharp distinction between individual material sensation and non-individual understanding.
I'm sorry, we can't hear you very clearly. You need to speak to the camera more.
Oh, sorry. Yes, you're right. Thank you for warning me. Aquinas maintains that what is bodily and material about me constitutes my privacy, my individuality. Think, what is bodily, material, constitutes my privacy, my individuality. Whereas my intellectual capacities liberate me from the prison of my subjectivity. This fact makes us see how thoughts are distinguishable from other acts of the individual sentient animal, and that, therefore, they are a sort of going beyond materiality. And yes, so I have to cut a few paragraphs off, and we have to focus, and now I'm going to finish, Thomas, promise, on this very philosophical point. Language thought does not have two purposes: escaping from individuality by communicating. Communicating means finding something in common. Communicating, finding something in common, and with other people. And second purpose, transcending the subjectivity of the sheep and the wolf. The sheep which deals with the wolf just as something dangerous for it. But understanding means describing reality in itself. But those two purposes are not really two purposes, but rather there is just only one purpose with two indivisible sides. According to this view, we are able to find something in common, communicate, among us human animals, just only, exclusively, just only by understanding something of the world in itself. Or the other way around, we can't understand something of the world without communicating it to one another. So the social animal of Aristotle is a very rational animal of Aristotle. If this philosophical point is true, that interior silent dialogue we undertake many times throughout the day, misunderstood by Rodin, has to be interpreted as both a persistence and a development of many other interpersonal dialogues. The inner dialogue is an echo or the legacy of many interpersonal dialogues we already undertook throughout our lives, given that the individual human being is immersed within a linguistic community since her birth. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your lecture.
Thank you, Franco, for your entertaining lecture. And now we have quite a lot of time for your comments, or if you want to ask a question, just use raise hand icon, which you can find okay, we have already, just express some, okay. So a few questions were sent to us by our students. So maybe while we will await for some questions from the audience, I will copy paste a question from Marta Pietraszek. Marta, you are present, aren't you? Would you like to ask this question aloud? I will just...
Yes, thank you. Please do not paste it because I made a mistake in my question, so I'd rather ask it myself.
Hello, Marta.
Grazie mille della sua presentazione, professore.
Oh, you speak Italian very fluently.
Yes.
Don't you?
So I want to ask a clarificatory question. If thinking is secondary to the language, because if so, we would have a problem with people who are not members of linguistic community, like the famous case of Kaspar Hauser, for example.
Yes. Thank you for your question, because it's very direct and basic. Thank you. I would answer in a similar, basic and simple way. Yes, they do not belong to the linguistic community.
Yes, but the question was if thinking is secondary to the language. So if thinking appears only if we are members of the linguistic community.
Yeah. That is a very core point of this philosophy, that thinking and speaking, even if you speak silently, are the very same thing. That is, this statement entails two things. First, that you can't speak without thinking. Second, you can't think without speaking, even though silently, mind. So that Casper film of Herzog, Werner Herzog, speaks about the so-called wolf boy who was raised or brought up by wolves, doesn't it? And so he was not able, despite the very kind and careful actions of that doctor, he was not able to speak. Therefore, according to this theory, he was not able to think. I just want to prevent a possible objection about cynicism, cynical attitude, the cynical attitude of this philosophy. I want to prevent that saying that human dignity, according to some humanistic views, but certainly according to Christian view, is not based on thinking. It was, according to Aristotle, in the pagan world. Yes, indeed, that's true. But according to the Christian world, even a disabled or very severely disabled person has got the very same dignity of a philosopher, of a bishop. Yes, he cannot act as a bishop, the very severely disabled person who is not able to speak and therefore to think. Is not able to perform the actions, the role in the society of a bishop, of a technician, of an engineer, of a politician, of a teacher, is not able. And we would be crazy in stating that. But he has got the very same dignity. And if a Nazi, a crazy, wicked, evil Nazi appeared among us, and we were a Christian community, for instance, and asked, "Oh, I allow you to choose. I will kill one person. You choose. If I will kill the ruler of the community, or the bishop of the community, or the engineer of the community, or this disabled person." If the Nazi asked this question, a real Christian community would not have an easy answer, an easy choice. Because human dignity is not related to rationality, according to some humanistic views, perhaps, but certainly according to Christian view. I wanted to prevent a possible objection, Marta.
Can I ask something more related?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. I have a sensation that sometimes what I say is much poorer than what I think. So language makes my thoughts seem more banal, for example.
Yes, that is common experience. I think that I can ask the audience, raise an hand, whoever never experienced this experience. I think that nobody will raise her hand, because it's very common an experience, isn't it? But it is a delusion. It is a very strong delusion. Not just of you, Marta, of me as well. But it's a delusion. When we pretend, we claim that our thoughts are stronger and more sophisticated and more clever and original than our words, it's just out of pride. and delusion. And the real achievements of human beings, of humankind, comes not from our sensation of being clever, but from our actions and speeches.
Grazie.
Well, welcome.
Thanks, both of you. Okay, there is a question posted by Michał Bijak in the chat box.
President, I would like to read it aloud. I would like to ask, maybe it's a matter of or whatever the differences between the Christian and the Aristotelian view. However, I would like to say, how then can we stick to the Aristotelian definition of a man as a rational animal if he does not use language? Would he then just not be animal? Would that not attack the Aristotelian definition?
Yes, the Aristotelian definition is rational, and that translation into the 20th century philosophy of language is linguistic animal, made by de Saussure. I mentioned McCabe, I mentioned Wittgenstein, I mentioned de Saussure, didn't I? And I want to highlight very shortly that the genius among them was de Saussure, not Wittgenstein, not McCabe. The original mind which first discovered this but this unity between thought and speech was Ferdinand de Saussure dans his Cours de linguistique générale of 16. And I answer you to your remark, Michael. I cannot see you, perhaps because you have not your web camera switched on.
It's off because I can't put it in a right place.
Okay, doesn't matter. I answer to your remark, Michael, saying that the definition of human beings according to Christianity is not the Aristotelian one, or that one coming from the philosophy of language of the 20th century, for that matter.
Okay, so
but is children of God. What is the definition of human beings according to Christianity? Is it perhaps rational animals? No. It is children of God.
Well, then I suppose that solves the normative aspect of it all, or the ethical one. However, I would still like to ask, is it in this theory that when I imagine, for example, geometrical figures and I do some operations on them, wouldn't it be true that in the light of this theory, I am not thinking in that moment? Is it so? Is this something else? Is it a different power of the mind?
Excuse me, what moment? Say again.
Well, I'll just phrase the question.
What moment?
When I'm imagining geometrical figures and I'm, for example, moving them about in my imagination.
Yes.
Is this not thinking in this theory? Because I think it would be very against our common intuitions that then I'm doing some thinking in that.
Yes. Thank you for this example you provided us with, because I can answer and comment your example, saying that according to this theory, when I imagine different geometric figures interacting with one another, I am still thinking, because I am saying to myself or to my stored memory of my teacher of mathematics, or my primary school teacher, or whatever, or whoever, I'm still saying that is a circle, that is a triangle, that is a sphere. I am saying, even though silently, it is not important if I speak aloud or silently. I think that if we do undertake this experiment throughout our daily own experience, we can see that our silent speech or dialogue becomes aloud quite a few times, especially when we are angry or we are perplexed or we are desperate or we are passionate. Then abruptly that silent dialogue becomes aloud or loudly. And yes, while I am imagining those squares and circles and triangles, I am saying to myself or to the stored memories of my teachers, that is a circle. The other one, which is approaching, is a triangle, is not a unicorn, is not a fairy woman, is not a cake, is a triangle. And that is thinking. That is thinking.
Yes, but does that not reduce any sort of thinking to some kind of language statement? For example, I'm not sure, because this sort of equates, for example, noticing something and saying that it is that thing. When I say I see a dog, when in the situation, I'm describing a situation now, I see a dog. In the situation of when I'm seeing a dog, you're like, it seems to be different than to say I see a dog, to make a report on the matter of affairs.
Well, I don't understand, to be honest, so well your example. I'm trying to interpret it, and if I saw a dog or whatever, a dog, sticking to your example, a dog, there are two options. That I can recognize that colored image from sight, from the very sense of sight, as a dog, or instead I do not recognize it. Two options. I do recognize that colored moving image from the sense of sight as a dog, or I do not. So first possibility, I recognize it as a dog. I think that you could agree with me that then I would think, because saying that colored moving image is a dog is thinking, is inserting that individual entity into a set, into a group, into a class, into a universal, the universal of dog. Second possibility, I do not recognize that moving colored image as a dog. Perhaps because I am confused, I've drunk too much, because it is so too far from me, that poor dog, and so I do not recognize it as a dog. But even then, I can say it is something moving, and to say something material because it's colored, something material and moving, those two statements to myself are thinking, because are insertions of that individual sense experience from sight into sets, the sets of material things and the sets of moving, non-still moving things.
Oh, yes, I understand what you're saying. However, the problem is that there seems to be a qualitative difference between noticing something and a language statement, a statement in language, and how is, in this theory is it not just quite just short answer, please.
Well, in the example you said, I see a dog, I can see just two possibilities. I recognize it as a dog or not. I don't see a third possibility. And I commented the second one, so if I do not recognize it as dog, even then, I do think, I do insert it into some set. Said with other words, dear Michael, I would say, I would put the burden of the proof onto you. The burden of the proof onto you. And please, Michael, try to say in the second possibility, when I do not recognize that moving thing as a dog, if I can notice, you used that verb, didn't you? Notice?
Yes, but that's...
I notice that what? Is it possible that you do not, you would not say something, is colored, is moving, I nothing, something colored, something moving, something big, something huge, something distant, something near. Is it possible or not?
It seems possible, however, my question is completely of a different kind. You take the situation of part of I see or not see. I'm only describing the world in which I see and there is a dog. Okay, and the thing is that there seems to be a very big difference between this whole quality going, all of these qualities going through my mind and of the situation, and making a statement in language. And in this theory, is it not that these two situations are somewhat, these two things are somewhat equated, that they're the same, that the difference is not pointed out?
Yes, we can disagree, of course, with each other. But according to, I can say, because of my studies, from my studies, that I'm certain that according to this philosophy of de Saussure, Wittgenstein, and McCabe, it is impossible to perceive some sensations, as for us, linguistic animals, without associating them to thoughts. But yes, we can disagree with each other.
Answers my question, or because the question was in this theory about this theory, the world, how this theory describes. So I am satisfied with the answer. Thank you.
Oh, we are welcome.
Okay, thanks. If you want to ask a question, you can also write me in chat box. Not just, of course, you can use this icon, but you can, if you prefer, you can write down me in the chat box. But Paolo Lucas is the next, and after Paolo, Adam. Okay. So please, Paolo, ask your question or make a comment.
Switch on your microphone. Switch on your microphone.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's the first time I'm using this Google Meet, so I hope I'm doing everything clear. So, my name is Paolo Lucas. I'm a former student of Professor Franco Manni, and I'd like to add something to the answer that Professor Manni gave to Marta. I remember when I was a student and we had an exam, some of us said things like, Professor, I understood it, but I cannot express it. And the answer of Professor Manni was, if you cannot express the idea or the thought, that means that you did not understand it, right or wrong? So I remember that that was the answer of a professor in order to explain that if something is not clear in our mind, we couldn't express through words. And this is something I think very interesting. So that was the first point. The second point is not really related with this with the topic of this meeting, but I'd like to express it in a few words. So I think that everything is politics, okay? Thinking, acting, saying something, it's related with politics. So I'd like to encourage all of you that you are scholars and intellectual to use this tool of Google Meet also to talk about this coronavirus outbreak, because this is a situation very weird in which we are living, and it's bringing new topics that are very interesting to deal with. For example, the freedom of speech, the freedom of movement, and how the government are using this coronavirus outbreak to limit our freedom of speech and the movement and so on. So that's my contribution to this meeting, and I finish my contribution. Okay?
Yes. Thank you, Paolo Lucas. I can comment the first point of what you said, saying that when I was rebuking the students because they were saying, I studied, I've got in my mind the ideas, but I'm not able to express them, that when I rebuked them, I didn't rebuke with your tone of voice, but with another harsher one. Second, harsher, tougher one. Second comment is that, yes, I think that COVID or the Biden who they took over in the United States of America are very important topics, but the frame of these web seminars on the web of the Polish Association of Semiotics are about the very mission of the association. So speaking about signs, words, concepts, and thoughts. Well, perhaps if a scholar had proposed a proposal about the Ogden triangle, you know, the Ogden triangle. So there is the sign, what is meant by the sign, and the real, so the concept, and the real thing out of the mind, the triangle of Ogden and Richards. And I'm sure that Thaddeus and Thomas know the Ogden-Richards triangle very well, don't you? Because you belong to that semiotics, Association of Semiotics. About the COVID is something real, external to our minds, and COVID as a concept of a deadly virus, for instance, and COVID as a sign, as a bunch of words. If a scholar had proposed that proposal, I think that the organization, the association, would have accepted it, but perhaps there was not any scholar proposing such a proposal.
Not so far yet, so let's focus on meaning, signs, and language here. And this issue you mentioned, Paolo, are important and interesting as well, but I think that the time will come to address them later, okay? So the next question is from Adam Congiela. Adam, if you don't mind, please.
Thank you. You probably won't be happy because Paulo said about politics, and my question is related to politics. I want to ask because I haven't found any information yet, and my question is: did McCabe draw from Thomas Aquinas also in political aspects? Did he define relations between modern times ecclesiastical authority and secular authority?
Well, it's a good question, and that question makes me think that you are interested in medieval thought, aren't you?
Yes, of course. I knew some about Aquinas' way of thinking.
This is the main work by Thomas Aquinas about politics, De Regimine Principum. But your question is about McCabe, not about Aquinas, actually. And my answer is that McCabe did not rely on Aquinas about political matter. He relied on Marx. Sometimes, throughout his life, he self-described himself as a Marxist. A Marxist. I think, because I studied him for years in depth, that he did not read at length Marx's works. However, he got the spirit of some parts of Marx's philosophy. That is a concept of exploitation of one social class onto another one and over another one, because I've got Lorenzo Lodi, who is very expert in English language and was my teacher, so it's my superego now. It acts as my superego, don't you? And so, yes, about exploitation and about revolution. Those two very Marxist concepts were very present in McCabe's political works. But I want to highlight that the political works of McCabe are quite few. He was interested in politics, but he was more interested in theology and anthropology. So, as for your question, well, I don't know if I answered a little bit of your question. He self-described as a Marxist.
I see, but did he define relations between ecclesiastical authority and secular authority as Aquinas or Marx?
Well, neither, I would answer. Because according to Aquinas, this secular authority has too much to get from the ecclesiastic authority. And that was not the attitude of McCabe. McCabe was very in favor of, I don't know if, correct me, Lorenzo, if it is not a proper English word, laicism.
Yes, I understand.
Switch your microphone on.
Laicism?
Laicism?
Yes, I think so.
Laicism. He was very in favor of laicism. Also mind that he was Catholic, but he was living in a mostly Protestant country, United Kingdom. And nor he took the attitude of Marx, because Marx, you know, was very against the autonomous independence of churches within the state. He was against the independence of churches, religious churches, within the state. Whereas McCabe was in favor of independence of churches within the state. So I could say that he was neither Thomist nor Marxist on that respect. He was more similar to the liberal thinkers like John Stuart Mill or Karl Popper or, say, Isaiah Berlin.
Adam, are you satisfied? Would you like to?
I try to. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much for answering.
Welcome, Adam. Welcome. By the way, how is Eve?
Eva.
Sorry, a little joke of mine.
Okay, so we have another person, Julia. You raise your hand, so please. It's time for you now.
When it comes to me, thank you. I just want to make a short statement about Paolo's comment, because you, Paolo, said that everything is involved in politics when it comes to our mindset and sociology, but I'd rather think that the politics is getting involved in our morals and how we perceive the world. That the politics uses our points of view to gain power. So I would say that it's the other way around. So I don't know if you agree or not, or could it be also put this way?
Switch your microphone on.
Yeah. Yes, I do agree, Julia, with your point of view. Definitely, I agree with it. So thank you for adding this note to my previous statement.
Yes, Julia, I dare add that Paolo easily agrees with pretty girls.
Okay, so you're welcome. And thank you a lot for compliment. I also really like your ring that you're wearing on a hand.
Okay,
Say again.
That I am very thankful for your compliment. I haven't expected it, and I have to make a compliment to you as well, because I've noticed that you're wearing a ring and I find it very pretty and kind of outstanding. I meant Sir Franco.
Thank you. Very kind of you, and you, as you could perceive in this speech, I had to cut a few parts of it, but you could perceive, I think, that it is it comes from a long study about this topic, and it stands for history of philosophy. I could see that both in my country, Italy, and in the Anglophone world, where I stayed for 5 years, 1 year in Lancaster and 4 years in London, I could see that the memory of the history of philosophy is very, very little. So I could not find other people who were aware that these topics of the philosophy of language of the 20th and 21st centuries were the very same themes or topics of those scholars of the pagan ancient Greek world, of the Jewish and Muslim and Christian medieval world, of the Renaissance world of the Italian secular thinkers. There is not this awareness. I think that long-lasting tradition is at stake, if that is a correct phrase, Lorenzo, of being lost and forgotten, at risk of being lost and forgotten. So I would like to give you this message: care for history of philosophy. Let us not lose our past.
Thank you a lot. I have that in mind.
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
and
thanks.
By the way, Thomas?
Okay, thanks. And before Roland, there was a question sent to us by Bartosz Wesoł. Bartosz.
Yes, hello.
Please.
So
Hello.
I think my question is related to what Michał Bijak said about mathematics, because yes, there is the question of that.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I wanted to ask, what do you think McCabe would say about mathematics in general, how he would describe it, and specifically what he would say about developing new mathematical concepts, because I see it as a candidate for something pure, intelligible, and I think it can be problematic for this point of view.
So what McCabe would think about mathematics? That is your question, isn't it? So, first of all, as for the cultural background of McCabe himself, he does not have any training in mathematics. And according to my long-lasting studies, I was not able to find any book he read about mathematics. He studied chemistry in his first academic year at the Manchester University, as Roland McCabe can confirm, but then he got rid of that chemistry studies and enrolled into philosophy department. That is the background of McCabe as a person. As for his ideas, he sticks to the ideas of Aquinas, which is, he sticks to the ideas of Aristotle, because this is amazing, that Aquinas was able to revive the pagan thought of a person of the 4th century before Christ, Aristotle. There are 17 centuries between Aristotle and Aquinas, whereas between Aquinas and us, there are just 7 centuries. 17, 7. And the Aristotelian Themistic way of setting down this question is, as for, say, a mathematical concept, square root. According to Aristotelian Thomistic philosophy, when I think the concept of square root, I will think about a concept that is a set. Concept means set, means group. That is the very meaning of concept. The group of what? Of all the operations, millions perhaps, or billions of them, undertaken by human beings, when they divide a number for itself, by itself. When they divide a number by itself. Is it a square root operation or not? So what is a square root operation, Lorenzo? He studied physics.
The square root is the inverse operation to squaring.
So square root is when I divide a number for itself or not?
You find the number which multiplied by itself gives the original number.
Yeah, yes, because if I divide, 4 by itself, I obtain 1.
Yes.
Whereas the square root of 4 is 2, isn't it? Oh, nice, very nice. I still remember something from my primary school mathematics. So that is, what is the concept of square root? Is a group, because a concept, the Platonic idea, the Aristotelian concept, the medieval universalis, is a set represented by the Venn's diagrams. A set. A set of what in this example? A set of all the millions, or perhaps billions of operations undertaken by human beings when they wanted to find out what is the number that multiplied for itself would have resulted in the given number. That is the set. What is a set? Is a group. What is a group? Is multiplicity of individuals, isn't it? So when I would think about square root, I would think of a set of those plurality of operations undertaken throughout the years of the centuries by human beings, you know? But Aristotle and Aquinas and McCabe used to think that in order to think, to group, because to think is to group. What is the meaning of to think? Is to group. Quite paradoxical, isn't it? When we want to think, that is to group, we must relate our grouping to some individual image. For instance, now I confess openly to all of you what is the individual image I relate my concept of, my thought of, my idea of square root. It is on a yellowish paper, not really white, but yellowish paper, unwritten V with a long horizontal trait, written with a blue pen, but not horizontally, but diagonally, on a slant position. And it is written with a blue pen on a yellowish paper. And there is a number, yes, there is not 4, sadly, but there is 2 written under the V. And that is the individual image I associate to the concept of square root. And I challenge you, I challenge all of you, I challenge now all of you, if you had to think the concept of square root, could you do that? Were you able to do that without associating it to any sense image? Yes or not?
But I don't think it is the crucial thing here, because when you asked us to think that this concept, I would say you rather ask about imagining it, not thinking it. But because when you think about the concept not as a static group or set of things, but an operation, the thinking is a process, and you cannot represent it by an image or something. Maybe it's because I think the mathematics here is a problematic example for this way of thinking, because also when you said about the concept of this mathematical action, and it's only, if you say it's only a set of, for example, past.
Say what?
Of past
operations,
like actual operations that some people did, but how can we then how can we think about, how can we explain this new examples of the of using of this concept and the operation, because it's mathematically it is possible to do it infinite number of times. Like it's not I don't know how to.
Yes, I can see what I can guess what perhaps you want to say. I can guess. Perhaps you want to say that in the future I can undertook other square roots operations.
Yeah. That's
yes,
basically what I wanted to say.
Insofar as they will be square root operations and not divisions, not additions, and not other operations, they will be grouped with the others of the past in that very set and not into other sets. Won't they?
Oh, sorry. Could you repeat?
They will be inserted, put within, inserted in that very set, together with the other past operations of a square root, into that very set, not into other sets.
Okay, but we can ask, because how was like the first the foundations of this sets, how were they possible?
The characteristics in the case, in the example we got, the example of square root operation is quite static. I say quite because I don't dare say that in mathematics the concepts remain always the same. I remember I am keen on humanities, not on mathematics, but nevertheless I know that in the 19th century Lobachevsky and Riemann invented the non-Euclidean geometries. And so what the concept of parallel lines, which remained still static for millennia, changed, because Lobachevsky maintained that there are infinite number of parallel lines, and Riemann claimed there are no parallel lines. Whereas Euclid held that there were just one parallel line to the given line on the same plane, or plane. So the example we took is quite tricky, because the example of a science, mathematics, where the concepts do change, but quite slowly, don't they? Whereas if we took another example, the concept of revolution, the set or concept of group of revolution is made of individual revolutions throughout the history, human history. For instance, if we said that revolution is some violent uprising of human beings against the rulers, shedding blood, we could not insert the glorious revolution of 1688. Why we couldn't? because in that revolution, blood was not shed, was it? It was called glorious for the very reason because blood was not shed. So if we inserted that individual in the group or set of revolution, that one undertaken by William III and the Parliament in 1688 in England, we should change the shape of the set in order to accommodate that individual event. Shouldn't we? So we should reshape the characteristics needed in order to group the individuals into the set in another way, saying a revolution is a radical change of regime with or without shedding blood. Shouldn't we? I wanted to provide you with another example drawn from history instead from mathematics in order to show that the sets are not static. I never said that according to Aristotelian Thomistic view, the sets are static. I never said that. Quite the contrary, I think that the sets are changeable.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your answer.
Welcome.
Now it's time for Roland. Okay, please.
Hi. Yeah, thank you very much for this lecture. I was Herbert's nephew, and I knew him quite well as a kid. Well, as a man as well. And just wanted to add some information about him, that he was very much a revolutionary, and you know, he had radical views, I suppose, for the time, and he knew all governments were corrupt. He knew the Catholic Church was corrupt, and but he would encourage people to stay in the Catholic Church, you know. And yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit of information about him. So that's all I wanted to say. I don't really have a question, but I really enjoyed listening to all the discussion. And I just wanted to add that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Roland. So did you know your uncle when you were already grown up?
Yes, I've known him ever since a baby, basically. Yeah.
And how was he? Was he ready to become angry or not?
I never saw him get angry other than when he would talk about atrocities and things like that. He would get very angry. But no, he was mainly a joyous person, loved to sing, loved to drink, and have fun and hang around with the family and everything like that. And he loved discussions on philosophy, and taught me a lot about, well, not a lot, but he would challenge me a lot with my views, because he would have been horrified at some of the things that I did, like join the British Army and things like that. But he would never tell me off or anything like that. He would just work on me by pointing out truths and encouraging me to think. And anybody, he was the same with anybody. He would encourage you to think.
Yes. Your testimony sounds similar to me, to the testimonies given to me by his former students. He was keen on philosophizing always, even while having meals.
Yes.
Sorry, Roland, have you fought in the Falkland War, perhaps?
No, I never saw action. I was a musician in the army, and if there had been a war, I would have been a stretcher bearer.
Oh.
Yeah, so I left by the Falklands War.
So in 1982, didn't you?
Yeah, I left in 1980, yeah.
1980, so before.
Yeah, before Falklands. Okay, so it was a nicely comment from UK probably, and now we have a question sent from Sicily by Anna Mai. Anna, would you like to ask it aloud?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Mr. Franco, I didn't. Did I understand correctly? Because I all the time thinking about this. That you say that the boy recite the vowels could not think because he don't know the language.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yes.
was correctly what I understand.
Indeed, you understood correctly.
Okay. So give me some time because I'm thinking a little bit about this and I have few questions, but 10 minutes, okay?
Well, 10 minutes perhaps is not allowed to us by the timetable.
Oh, okay, but maybe some person have questions.
Okay, so while we wait for the questions of Anna, please take opportunity and ask or make
Maybe
a comment.
a follow-up to the question. So, according to the view you were sketching in your talk, so animals can't think, according to that view, right? Or they can?
Insofar as they do not have language.
So, well, the official view is that non-human animals don't use language. They can use systems of signs of various sorts. That's proven empirically in a quite adequate manner, but they definitely don't use language in the sense in which we use term language as something having syntax and other properties. So is that the consequence of the view you are defending, that animals can't think?
Insofar as they do not have a language, but I have to define what language is. Language is not just the system of words, but is a system of signs. And we know, at least I think that we as contemporaries of the 21st century, we know that some mammals can have a system of signs by means of which they can communicate to one another. As for McCabe himself, he was stuck to the conservative ecclesiastic tradition, not ecclesiastic, conservative, because not just ecclesiastic, was secular as well, before the Second World War, which loved to separate sharply the linguistic animals, human beings, from the other animals. That was an habit, an attitude before the Second World War, when McCabe was having his intellectual training. But as for me, and as for what I understood of the spirit of the theory, it is not relevant that we rely on a linguistic system of signs, but that we rely on a system of signs. De Saussure, which was a founder, the very real first founder of linguistics in 1916, held that there are quite a few systems of signs. And for instance, if we remain examining us ourselves as humans, we have a facial system of facial expressions. Anger, desire, perplexity, and tiredness. That is, in brief, a short system of signs. Also, by the means of the flags or the Morse signals, we've got the Saussure noticed in 1916 a few systems of language, but by far the most powerful system of signs is the system of words. Why? The Saussure said it explicitly. It is the most, by far, the most powerful system of signs because they link or tie between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. That is the strength, the clever and glorious strength of the system of words, because differently from other system of signs, which are not arbitrary, words are.
So your thesis at the end of the day is that actually there is no thinking without systems of signs, but this is a different thesis than the thesis that claims that there is no thinking without language, because not every system of signs is a linguistic system or a system of language. So.
Yes, when you are right, when I used the very word language throughout my lecture, I meant system of signs. So, in brief, roughly speaking, taking the system of words as the emblematic or most powerful system of signs.
Yeah,
you know, semiology is a French word invented by Ferdinand de Saussure quite before the Anglophone word semiotics.
No, that's not true. The word semiotic was invented by John Locke. You can find it in John Locke work. So this is.
Thank you for your remark.
The origin of the term.
For your remark, I said that because the popularity of the word semiotics, even in my language, Italian, came from the Anglophone word and not from the French word, and it came from Wittgenstein and the other Anglophone philosophers. However, what I wanted to highlight is that from the very beginning of linguistics, from the cradle of linguistics, Ferdinand de Saussure said that there are several systems of signs, but the most powerful is the system of words.
Thank you. I have nothing to add, so it's difficult to disagree with that.
Yes,
Now,
I have a question. How you prove that this boy cannot think? Because I don't understand why you say like this. How they prove this? Because what? The boy. Do you understand my question?
Well, I think that neither McCabe nor me, nor Wittgenstein, nor whatever philosopher of language of the 20th century could meet in person that boy from La Forêt des Ardennes in France, back in the 18th century, because he was dead for long. when those philosophers made their theories. But having said that, I would add that we can experiment not speaking or trying to speak with that boy, because we don't live in the 18th century, nor we live in France, but we can experiment with babies and with ourselves. And we can see by means of our experiments that without signs, and I accept easily the suggestion from Thaddeus that we have to enlarge linguistic into semiotics or semiology, so a system of signs, but we can't think without a system of signs. And so we cannot meet that boy because he's dead for long. But we can do those experiments interacting with babies nowadays.
Okay, so
I wanted just shortly.
They don't have proof, please. And also your experiment is not good because this boy was with the wolves, so he thinking like wolves, not like a human. But because he don't have tools for be a wolf, so he couldn't for 100% thinking like a wolf. And this is why he had one legs in the wolf's world and one legs in a human world, because he was human. But I think the wolves show him how to think in the wolf's way. So your experiment is not the same because you have the baby with you. So the baby have to thinking like a human with you. You understand that it's not the same experiment?
Well, I take your objection, and reading that objection of yours to what Thaddeus said, so to enlarge from systems of words into systems of signs, I can agree with you that the wolves had in that forêt des Ardents a system of sign between their pack of wolves. I can agree, but I can also repeat what I just said, commenting what Thaddeus said, that system of signs of those mammals, wolves, not insects, not words, let alone bacteria, but higher developed mammals, the wolves, was and is by far much less powerful than our system of signs, which is called system of words. And yes, we can speak about it in a speculative way because we can't interact with that boy, of course.
Yeah.
Surely we have the ability as humans to create languages with ourselves internally.
Yes, because as I said very shortly, because I had to cut off a lot of paragraphs from the text of my lecture, McCabe, your uncle, used to think that there is a difference between biological or genetic inheritance and cultural inheritance. So the cultural inheritance is specific of us as human beings. So we give a legacy to the next generation. We really do give a legacy, an inheritance. We do, but it's another kind of inheritance, because we give as a legacy of ours something we created, the cultural achievement of our generation, whereas the inheritance of the wolves is something more genetic, more biological. What is the meaning of biological? Innate. What is the meaning of innate? Which is not made.
Okay, but just to follow up, if there is no thinking without language or system of signs, then how would you explain that a child can learn language, acquire language, without thinking, without making any experiment?
Yes, that was what I was going to say, commenting what Anna said. That about this very topic you mentioned, the beginning of learning of language of us human beings in our first 3 years of our lives, 3 years, very short time. The most clever contribution to my knowledge was given to us by Sigmund Freud and his disciples like Melanie Klein, the scholars of psychoanalysis. And Sigmund Freud and his disciples held that we as small children from 0 to 3 are able to think because we internalize. Internalize means to put from external world into the internal world the dialogues or speeches of other people. First of all, our parents. We transfer them from outside into inside. And Freud developed this beautiful, strikingly new idea with the concept of superego, initially as a bad thing, as a too severe sense of our passions, feelings, and desires. But throughout his life as a scientist, he arrived to say that superego is the internalization of the images of our parents, of other people. So within us, there are other peoples. Better said, not the bones and flesh of other people, no, but the speeches of other people, yes.
Okay, thanks. Dennis is raising his hand, and then Marta, okay?
Buonasera, professore.
Good evening.
Dobry wieczór. I think it's said like this. Sorry. My small contribution has more like computer science footprint because I'm a computer science student. And when Professor taught said that thinking is like classifying and grouping, I couldn't think about. I could not thinking about the artificial intelligence, and one of the most important applications of artificial intelligence that is actually classifying objects like images. And what I thought was the Turing test, that is somewhat trying to chat, so trying to communicate by means of a keyboard and a monitor with something that you don't know if it is a human or a computer that was exactly a robot that was trained maybe with a neural network or with other means from artificial intelligence. And so actually we are communicating with that thing, and we have to understand if it is a human or not. And if he is well trained, it will be a really hard work for us to distinguish. And what I was asking myself is, that robot is a human or it is not a human, for the fact that he is able to communicate with us?
So that is your question.
Yes.
This is an interesting question. I'm thinking because according to the theory I presented to you in my lecture, that robot is not able to think in a human way, because as for us humans, we are animals, whereas the robot is not an animal. And if you wanted, I would provide you with the difference between a machine, a robot, and an animal. But not to lose the logical thread of my answer to your question, I would postpone that explanation of the difference between machines and living beings afterwards. So, following the logical thread of my answer, I would say that he could think, but not in a human way. Why not in a human way? He could communicate, because if you paid attention to my lecture, I said next to the end of my lecture, I said that we can't think, so describe the world as it is in itself, not according to our needs, not according to our hatreds or loves. No, but how it is in itself. That is thinking. Differently from the sheep who flees the wolf. Differently, because the sheep is not able to describe the world. We are, because we think. And I said that we can't help thinking without communicating. We are allowed to think, to describe the world as it is in itself, just only, exclusively by communicating to one another. There is no other way. So, going back to your question, I would answer saying that because it's a robot, a machine, it could communicate with us and so describe the world as it is in itself, but not in a human way, because the human way of thinking, if you paid attention to my lecture, is always, without any exception, relating concepts, which is sets, ideas, sets. What is an idea? It is a set. That's all. What is an idea? Oh, it is something light in the sky. No. It is a set. That's all. But we, humans, cannot help thinking, so grouping, without relating our groups or sets to images. Because we are animals, whereas the robot is not. So it doesn't have senses, let alone sense memory. If you paid attention to my lecture, the sense memory is that interior sense which allows us to have past, the awareness of past, of autobiography. When I learned some intellectual thing, 2 + 2 = 4, but in that class group, when I was attending my second year of my primary school, and there were a few classmates who were teasing me. And so I was experiencing attraction and repulsion. And that is the only way, as an animal which is endowed with a sense memory, whereas a robot is not, I can have a sense of my past. And that is the human way of thinking, different from the machine way of thinking.
Okay. There is also some discussion going on in the chat box. For example, Anna comment, animals think better than humans because they are not limited by the precision of language. What do you think about it?
That without precision, you cannot think. Because to think is to distinguish a set from another set. To put boundaries. What is to think? Is to put the boundary between the sets of chairs as distinguished from the sets of tables. There are two sets, the set of tables and the set of chairs. And if I didn't put the boundaries, because she was speaking of precision, wasn't she? If I didn't put the boundaries, the precise boundaries, I could not think what a chair is or what a table is. If I melted the boundaries between the two sets, would I? Answer.
Okay. I have another question for you. This one, how is for you different from thinking and contemplating?
To contemplate
Yeah,
is a technical word which is used by ancient philosophers, medieval philosophers, not so often by modern philosophers. However, to contemplate, what is the meaning of contemplate? This subset is a species of thinking. It's not another set, it's not another concept, it's a subset, sub-concept, a species of thinking. So we have got many subsets of thinking: the practical thinking, the psychological thinking, the mathematical thinking, the economical thinking, and there is a scholar, perhaps the professors who are present now can help me, who wrote a famous book about the different intelligences, different kinds of intelligences.
Daniel Dennett.
Say again?
You are talking about Daniel Dennett, I think.
Could you write it down on the chat, please? Because I don't remember the name, perhaps you're very right, thank you. But he wrote a famous book, which was translated into Italian in the 90s, about the multiplicity of intelligences, of different kinds of thinking. One of the kinds of thinking is contemplation. It's just one of the kinds of thinking, but still thinking, not sensing, but still thinking. I remember that this word, which is in Greek, ancient Greek, theoreza, theoresein in ancient Greek, which means contemplating, is used by Aristotle himself in the 10th book of Nicomachean Ethics, if you remember. And he said that that is the very act of happiness, of human happiness, not the happiness of God, but the happiness of human beings, is theoresein. According to him, that kind of thinking, which is not the thinking of the scientist, not the thinking of the technical worker, not the thinking of the practical wise man, but is the act of thinking of the sophistas, in Latin sapiens, is the very act of happiness, but is an act of thinking, not an acting of sensing.
Okay, Marta is waiting for a long time. Probably I didn't keep my promise to give you a voice, so it's your turn, Marta, please.
It's fine. Thank you so much, and good evening. And I want.
Good evening.
Thank you. I just wanted to take an example which is maybe closer to us to understand, like the statement that Anima and Dennis made before. And I'm talking about Helen Keller. I don't know if you know her, but she died in 1968, so like it's contemporary.
No, I heard of her, but didn't read any books from her.
No, but I saw a movie, and I know that it's not enough, but I was thinking about her when the meeting started, because like as Mr. Roland McCabe said about the question that Dennis made, the robot is not conscious, but her, she was conscious, but since she was deaf and blind, she was not able to speak until her teacher came to her and taught her how to spell the words with the manual alphabet. So I was thinking, before that moment in her life, wasn't she able to think because she was having no meaning to express her? I don't know.
Are you finished?
Yes.
So I didn't catch. Can you spell using other words your question, please?
Yes, I was thinking, if since Helen Keller wasn't able to understand the things around her before her teacher arrived and made her to learn how to spell the alphabet in her hands, okay, before that very moment, according to what we said this afternoon, wasn't she able to think because she was having no way to, I don't know,
to express, to put. I've just said, answering to what Anna, if I'm not mistaken, said, yes, about precision, that Anna Keller started to think insofar as she was able to put boundaries between chairs and tables, birds and worms, male and female, air and floor, food and starvation. Without being able to put boundaries to determine different characteristics, she could not think. But I didn't see the film. Is it a film about uncolor life?
Yes, it is called The Miracle Worker, I think.
I have not watched it. However, when the tutor of hers taught her how to express the cuts, I use this word because it's a very word used by Ferdinand de Saussure, to cut, to cut. We can think, why? Because we can cut. We can cut a group from another group. If we had not been able to cut or to put the boundaries between groups, we would not be able to think. And without using voice, as I can understand from what you said, but using the sense of touch, the sense of touch. The tutor used to touch the hands of Anna Keller, didn't she?
Yes.
By means of the sense of touch, she could express that cuts, for instance. 2 touches is cold. 3 touches is warm or heat. What is 2 touches instead of 3 touches on the hands of Anna Keller? Is putting boundaries, is cutting meanings.
So, before that very moment, since she wasn't able to think, she wasn't able to perceive the difference between, or to name the difference between hot and cold.
She could, by means of her senses, sense of touch actually, being aware of cold and warm temperatures, but just from a subjective point of view. So, being repulsed or attracted by heat when she was cold, or but cold when she was too hot. So, just from her point of view of attraction and repulsion, attraction and repulsion, but that is not thinking. Thinking is to describe the word and to communicate that description to other people. That is a very distinction from sensing and thinking. We can't share our sensations. We can just be attracted or repulsed, repelled. That's it. But by thinking, which means to cut, to put boundaries, to group, we can describe the word itself and communicate that description to other people. Whereas we can't share our sensations. We cannot share with anybody our sensations as themselves. This sensation of cold, sensation of warm, of red, of nostalgia, of fear, we cannot. We can communicate, so share, just describing those sensations as they are in themselves. And just doing that, we can share them with other people. Aquinas used to say, McCabe made me know that Aquinas several times used to say one of the best achievements of the philosopher. Who is the philosopher? Is the highest mind bestowed to humankind. Aristotle, the highest mind, I agree with Aquinas, highest mind ever in humankind, Aristotle. The philosopher, one of the best achievements of a philosopher is the distinction between sense and intellect. Sense is what is not shareable. Intellect is what is shareable.
Okay, thank you for sharing these thoughts with us, Franco. And who else? Who is gonna ask another question? Or we have some time for some final comments or questions, if you like.
You said people speak too much. Commenting this way. Perhaps people speak too often, loudly, aloud, whereas they should speak in that interior or inner dialogue within themselves, silently, before daring speaking loudly. And as for the precision again, because you stick on that concept of precision, I remember a dead philosopher, Italian philosopher, who died a few years ago, Umberto Eco. In the 60s, he wrote a book. In Italian, the title is Opera Aperta, which means open work. Opera Aperta, open work. And it is about poetry. The language of poetry, according to that book by Umberto Eco, is open to a multiplicity of meanings. But mind that multiplicity of meanings in the language of poetry, which is a poem, a sonnet by Shakespeare, a lyric by Pindarus, or by an Italian poet like Leopardi. I love that Italian poet, Leopardi, is available to several different interpretations. So a multiplicity, but please don't confuse multiplicity with lack of precision. They are not at all the same concept. Multiplicity and lack of precision. Because each one of those multiple meanings or interpretations available to the readers of a poem, because you can write the timetable of the trains from Manchester to Lancaster, okay? And that train timetable is not open to a multiplicity of meanings. There is just one. At 9:31, there is a train from Manchester railway station to Lancaster railway station, and that's it. Just one meaning. Whereas the sonnets by Shakespeare, they are poems. So that function of language is different from the timetable of the trains from Manchester to Lancaster, and it provides us with a multiplicity of interpretation of meanings. Meanings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, say. But multiplicity is not lack of precision, because each one of the 6 meanings is very precise and very cut off from the others.
Okay.
So, who else? It's almost 8 p.m. So maybe it's time to end our seminar. If there are no further questions, then I would like to express my sincere thanks to you, Franco, and to all of you for spending time with us this evening or late afternoon. Thank you for your comments, remarks, discussion, and questions. So,
I have last question.
Okay, Anna, please.
What kind of books you recommended for this subject? Please tell me.
Oh, my book?
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so, definitely. And in particular, that chapter about philosophical anthropology. That chapter is the longest chapter of the book, and in my opinion is the most original of the book.
Okay, can I write mail to you with this question for the list of the books?
Oh, your question will be most appreciated. Now I write down my mail address in a few seconds.
Okay, thank you very much.
No? Yes, that is my email address.
Yes, I have it.
So once again, on behalf of Tadeusz and myself, I would like to thank you, Franco, for your very entertaining talk, and for all of us for listening and discussing this topic. So, see you.
Yes, thank you, Thomas and Tadeusz, for hosting this seminar, and thank you to the attendees because they were interested enough. So that they remained for more than 2.5 hours.
Yeah, and the audience is quite international, isn't it? From Poland, from UK, from Italy, from I don't know, from maybe somewhere else even.
Well, from Sicily, which is not Italy.
Yeah. And he was caught up by COVID outbreak there, and since March he's been staying there.
I live in Macari. Macari is San Vito lo Capo.
Yes, nice place to stay. Okay, so thank you very much, and see you soon, hope.
Yes, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Good evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thanks.